So now, there we go, it's recording. So now I want to introduce the event tonight a little bit more. The name of the event is Students Uniting Then and Now. We have an awesome intergenerational panel of campus organizers who are going to share a little bit about their experiences being involved in campus organizing and hopefully inspire our audience to support campus organizing around social movements they're passionate about, either with their time or materially, or in whatever other way they might feel led. So this important area of campus organizing became really prescient to me this past spring when we saw student organizers from all around the country come together and playing a huge role in keeping the public focused on what was going on in the war between Israel and Palestine and the atrocities that were occurring in Gaza. So student activists took a huge stand and made a big statement about young people not accepting the indiscriminate violence and killing of civilians and asking the government and their universities to stop funding weapons of war. So student organized movements have a long and storied tradition going back before that. And our panelists here tonight have committed themselves to instituting changes in various social movements. And so we're gonna start today by just asking our panelists to introduce themselves and share a little bit about their ties and relationships to campus organizing.
Hello, my name is Yunus Makhtarzadeh. I'm from Columbia, Maryland, and I am originally from a small piece of land on earth called Afghanistan. And I say a small piece of land on this way because I don't believe in these artificial borders, which have caused a lot of battles, wars all over the world and problems up till now.
Yeah, if you want to say a little bit about your relationship to campus organizing as well, that would be
okay.
Great. Yeah.
So I was involved in activities at the University of Maryland. That's when I came to the university in 1964, and throughout the years I got involved in different activities on campus, political activities on campus and off campus, and also I established a Muslim Student Association at the university where we had weekly meetings.
And Yusuf, you just hold the mic a little
Okay.
closer for our
And
folks.
also I became the president of the Muslim Student Association of the United States and Canada for a year and served there. And also I've been involved in the Vietnam War and were able to convince the students who were usually going and occupying US 1, which is a main road to Washington, D.C., and blocking the traffic, and all else going and trashing some building or something. I was able to convince them to have a peace march instead, and we worked on that, and it happened successfully. I also was participating in Arab club meetings and knew people there. And one time I gave a suggestion to them to bring a lecturer, a historian, to give a lecture on Palestine and Israel and its history. And it was very informative, and the hall that we had reserved was full. The other activity that I was mentioning here is I was involved in the international club, and one of the activities we had yearly was an international day. On that day, foreign students of each country were given a table to bring their items that they had to show, to reflect what their culture and country was about. And um, in 1 year, when I was in charge, the Palestinians came and said, we want to have a table, because they never had a table because they were not a country. So I said, okay, we'll give you a table. And I give him the table. It has it was the party was successful. Everything went well, except of course there are some problems which I'll talk about later. And so basically that was it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for introducing yourself, Eunice.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Avella Chia. I am originally from Durban, South Africa, but I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina. I like to say that I got my start in organizing kind of from birth. You know, I feel like my my parents were both very active organizers. My mom is from South Africa and my dad is from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so, you know, both very involved in like anti-war, anti-apartheid movements. And then I was kind of born into that. And so I feel like I always grew up around that. But my personal start in organizing really came in 2020. That's when all the Black Lives Matter protests were happening very frequently. And before that, I had been, you know, kind of involved in organizing in my area, but that's when I really started to do things like attend protests and attend like student events on campus. So at that time, I was attending the University of North Carolina at Charlotte in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so we were having events on campus that were hosted by like the Black Student Union and our school's chapter of the NAACP. And these were all being co-sponsored with like other Black student organizations, like the Organization of African Students, Caribbean student organizations, were all coming together to host these events on campus. So I started attending them, kind of like building a network from there, because I was seeing a lot of the same faces as I was going to a lot of these events. And so that's what really got me into organizing. And then after I did that for a few years, and then I really got into organizing on campus around like immigrants' rights. So things like language access at the DMV, specifically in North Carolina, in-state tuition for undocumented students, because North Carolina is a locked out state. So undocumented students don't get in-state tuition, federal or state financial aid. And then community ID programs also for undocumented communities in North Carolina. So focused on that for a few years and did a lot of work on and off campus around that. And most recently, I was a part of the 2023-24 FCNL Advocacy Corps cohort. And so yeah, so really enjoyed that. So we started off the year last year organizing around violence interrupters and raising funding, federal funding for community violence intervention programs. And then after the events that took place on October 7th, a lot of our cohort felt like we just needed to shift gears and put all of our weight and focus into pushing for a ceasefire in Gaza. And so that's what we started organizing around. And I had um, some very interesting experiences with that, which I'll get into a little bit later. But yeah, that's kind of how I got into organizing.
Well, I'm Jim Kaysen. I'm a journalist now, and I'm super excited to be here because I feel like I'm the person who has the old news, what's happening now, and we can learn about from the Advocacy Corps and from Friends Place and from FCNL is really changing the conversation on Palestine. I am here because I was a student at a Quaker college in the Midwest. I got there in the early 70s, right after a coup happened in a country in Latin America, in Chile, that US corporations were involved in promoting. And that got me really focused on the role of US corporations in the in Chile, and I had already been looking at the role of US corporations in the United States. And I saw this intersection as something that I was really concerned of. I went to this school because they had a peace studies program, and we started to get involved in looking at where US corporations were taking action other places were investing and profiting from oppression, and got very focused on South Africa because there was a call from South Africa, particularly after an uprising in Soweto, to boycott and divest from South Africa. Not unlike what's happening today, although the call in South Africa had been going on for a while. We pushed the college to consider divestment, and that process, although the college never divested, that process really got me more educated about corporations, about the US role overseas, about labor movements in the United States, and about Quakerism. That was part of my journey to understand who John Woolman was, this prophetic Quaker who went around in his time also trying to change what people were doing in the Religious Society of Friends. And out of that, then when I graduated, I was involved as a volunteer in the anti-apartheid movement and the divestment movement, and eventually became associate director of the main organization promoting divestment that was really promoted first towards divestment from students, because there was a lot of other efforts to try to do things about what was happening in South Africa. But really, students on college campuses in the United States, hearing the appeals from people in South Africa, got involved and then pushed these other organizations to get engaged, religious organizations, doing divestment work. In the end, the American Committee on Africa and the Africa Fund was the main resource for students on college campuses who in the mid-'80s put up 100 shanty towns. Barack Obama talks about participating in a shanty town protest on apartheid, pushing as some much smaller, but as the protests today on campuses, trying to demand that universities do something with the tuition dollars that students and their families are paying to say something about oppression happening in another country, and also make the connection to oppression in the United States. For me, it was very important that it wasn't just over there, it was also in this country. So I'm gonna stop there, and we'll come back to it.
Thank you, Jim. And then Lucas, I'll invite you to introduce yourselves and share with everyone your connection to campus organizing.
For sure. Thank you so much. As was said, my name is Lucas. I am an undergraduate student at Georgetown University, and I'm currently involved in pro-Palestine student organizing. We've been involved in this push for months now for divestment, for our universities to divest from corporations that are complicit in the crimes against humanity that are being committed against the Palestinian people, for academic boycotts of Israeli institutions, which are fundamental themselves to the systems of apartheid and discrimination in occupied Palestine, and for an end to the repression of pro-Palestine student activism and the silencing of pro-Palestine speech on our campuses. I've been involved in pro-Palestine organizing since the spring semester of my freshman year, so it's been some time now, but obviously things have really picked up over the last 10-ish months, and especially this past April with the escalation to the encampment movement. I was involved in organizing the DMV SJP encampment, which took place at George Washington University, but was organized by students from 8 local universities. So it was this big collective effort that broke down these institutional barriers that we see throughout our city. I'm happy to talk more about that, but I don't want to go on a tangent right now. But yeah, I am super, super honored and humbled to be here. My comrades and I stand on the shoulders of these generations of student organizers who came before us. And I don't mean this lightly when I say there would be no pro-Palestine student organizing as it exists today had it not been for the student organizing against segregation and Jim Crow, against the American imperial war in Vietnam, against the apartheid in Afrikaner South Africa. we learn from and are truly guided by these legacies. And I'm really privileged to be sitting here and learning from my peers on this panel today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lucas. So now I want to hear from each one of our panelists a little bit more about their inspirations for getting involved in this organizing work, whether or not there was something they experienced, something they saw, something they learned that inspired them to take action, or if there was any kind of first action or moment where they were activated to continue in their organizing work. And we can start with you, Yunus.
Okay. What inspired me was a trip I took in the summer of 1966 to Colorado to visit my brother, who was a student at Colorado State University at the time. When I got there, and I was there for a couple of months, I noticed that my brother's politically, socially very active, knows a lot of foreign students and others and organizations. And he himself was a member of the Muslim Student Association at that university. And so when I came back, I really was inspired. And I said that I should get out of my closed place of just paying attention to my activities in school and my education. So I started, I thought about the first thing I did was to start a Muslim Student Association in our campus, on our campus. And that took some time. We did it in 1967, and it was a beginning, but it gave me at that time more kind of support in my own mind that, you know, I can be active in other things. So I started having relationships with the International Club and some Arab groups that had an organization, and other political organizations, social activities and things that were outside of even the campus or on campus. And so in that situation, what happened is, you know, in the war in Vietnam, which I became active also, the time was a very critical time when I got involved, and the campus was occupied by the National Guard, and they had even time limits of in the evening. We are not allowed to be out after a certain hour, a curfew. So when we started the work to do, and one day we decided to have a peaceful march, we started working at it right away to do things, and we did everything, and it was successful and ended before the curfew, and it was all good. Several thousand people attended it, but there were some problems that I'll talk about later. The other example I've taken is the International Club on campus, and again there we had as I mentioned, there was that students, the Palestinian students who wanted to have a table, and we tried to have a table, and it was problematic, and so we handled the problems, and it worked, and so that was the and in the Arab club that I was active, we had a lecturer come and talk, and we had problems there that I will talk about later. In the anti-Vietnam War movement that we worked, it really was very challenging because the National Guard was there and the rules were put by National Guard. I'll talk about the problems we faced there at that time. Every one of these activities inspired me to participate in other activities and join other things outside or on campus. And so that's how it rolled up.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing those inspirational views.
Yeah, so I will say there are probably two major things that come to mind when I think of what inspired me to get involved in campus organizing. And if I'm being honest, I would say the first one is probably anger, a lot of rage. I'm sorry, I know we're Quakers here and we believe in peace. Yeah. But earlier I stated that a lot of my organizing experience started in 2020. So I think, like a lot of us, we were seeing videos and news reports about things that were happening in the country around the BLM protest. I mean, we saw George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland, all these people. And so as I was seeing this, I was feeling outrage, I was feeling anger, and I was asking myself, like, what can I do to, make our country better, make this world a better place? Like, what can my contribution be? And so that's when I started to get connected with different student groups like the BSU, the NAACP, and attending their events. And from there, meeting people, and like the people that I would meet at those events, we kind of started to go off and like organize our own things at times, like both on and off campus. Um, and so that was probably reason number one. Also, the second reason that I would say that I really got involved in organizing was largely due to lived experiences of mine. So I also talked about some of my work with organizing around immigrant rights. So I myself am a DACA recipient. And so just having those experiences of like being an undocumented person in North Carolina, trying to apply for college and finding out that I can't get financial aid from the state of North Carolina. I don't qualify for in-state tuition, regardless of the fact that I'd been in North Carolina since I was 7 months old. And at that point, it had been 18 years that I'd been living in this state, and I couldn't get any type of financial aid or in-state tuition. And so knowing that, those barriers exist for not just me, but so many other people, I wanted to educate people on the issues that were happening, because I think so many of us, we have peers who are going through these issues and we might never know because a lot of people don't talk about it. I know when I was applying to college my senior year, I didn't know a lot of these barriers were in place because nobody really educated me on what it meant to be an undocumented person. And so I knew that I didn't want somebody else to face the same challenges that I had, and I wanted other people to be prepared when they got to that stage. And so that's what really fueled my campus organizing. And so I feel like once I really got into that space, I started learning about other social justice issues, because I feel like if you're an organizer, it's like, you just kind of jump from one issue to the next. You're always learning about something more that's happening. There's so many issues in our world. And so I was meeting people who were telling me about their lived experiences. And I was like, oh my goodness, well, we have to raise awareness around this issue too. And so once I was like forming those relationships, I was meeting students, and we were kind of just like organizing around whatever we felt like needed to have more attention, around. And so that's what really got me inspired into organizing. Also getting involved with like local organizations in my area through like volunteering and internships. A lot of these organizations, if you are a college student or if you're someone who's looking to organize on college campuses, they have resources that can help you, whether it's, them being willing to volunteer their time, volunteer resources, volunteer monetary donations to whatever it is you're organizing around. A lot of these local organizations have things and resources that can help you out. So yeah, that's what inspired me.
I think what inspired me first was people, probably. I had grown up outside of this country and then moved back for the last 2 years of high school. And I knew already that I wanted to live my life in a nonviolent way, but I didn't know how to do that. And I went to this Quaker college thinking I would learn something there. And I also had a lot of anger at the Quaker college for what they weren't doing. And there was a professor there who had just come back from Chile, who had worked with the president who was killed in the coup that the US corporation sponsored. And we were really angry. We were angry at the coup. We were angry at the US corporations. And it has to be said, we were angry at the Quaker administrators of this school who didn't move fast enough for us. And I think that I learned in that process how to focus that anger on trying to do something to address what I saw as a central problem, and that was the role of US corporations. But I learned it because of my elders and then because of the community. And for me, the other layer was the layer of Quakerism and learning a practice that would help me as I went forward in that work. And ultimately, then to become a national resource or to be part of an organization that was a resource. And for me, the most important part of this work is to have that community that you're working with, that's trying to do the kind of change that you're trying to make. Because that community, you can't, I don't believe you can do this on your own. I think you have to do it together. And so for me, being able to be part of a national resource for the anti-apartheid movement wasn't so much, it was more service than it, we certainly weren't leading the movement. We were servicing a national movement that was really growing up all over the United States. And then ultimately, I should disclose, I ended up working at the Friends Committee on National Legislation years later.
And then Lucas, if you would like to share some of your inspirations and motivations for getting involved with campus organizing.
Happy to. I mean, there's no singular answer to this question. I've wrestled for, I mean, at least since October, trying to figure out what the one pivotal moment in my life was that, pushed me to become an organizer. But I really don't think there was one pivotal moment. From a child, I was taught to stand against injustice by the experiences of my family. My grandparents on my mom's side were very involved in the movement against British colonialism in Egypt. And they, when they were in college, pushed heavily for socialist reforms that equitably redistributed land and made education free for all people in the country. Aside from that, part of my family is Armenian, and the Armenian genocide is in many ways a cautionary tale that demonstrates the horrors that can play out when we don't stand with our neighbors when they are facing injustice. And of course, I come from an immigrant family, so I grew up very intimately aware of the systemic injustices that target immigrants in this country and migrants who are hoping to seek shelter in this country. So in high school, my first major social justice concern wasn't Palestine, it was actually migrant justice. But early on in high school, took a family trip to occupied Palestine, to the West Bank, to see family friends there. And that was an extremely eye-opening trip. Because of course, beforehand, I had some idea that there were problems, that there was injustice going on, but it had never really been my concern because it was something I was so far removed from. I was much more concerned with, migrant justice because it was more immediate to me. It affected people in my immediate community. But then when I was there, I had the privilege of flying into the airport in Tel Aviv because I have US citizenship. And immediately upon landing, soldiers armed with assault rifles separated me and my sisters from my parents. They took a few of my cousins, held them, in solitary custody, interrogated them for hours, and that was our welcome to, Israeli occupied territory. All because, my cousins have Arabic names. They were perceived as threats. Just because my family is Arab, we were perceived as threats to, the safety and security of the country. So we were held in the airport for hours. And then once we were released for the airport, we started our drive to the West Bank, which I believe was a couple hours long. But once we reached, occupied Jerusalem and crossed over into the West Bank, we were greeted by the segregated road system. We were greeted by checkpoints where we were stopped, and again, armed soldiers would come search the vehicle, and it was terrifying. It was really terrifying and eye-opening because I only had to live that for the few weeks that I was there, but Palestinians have to live through that reality every day. We stayed in Bethlehem, and right through the middle of Bethlehem is a huge, huge wall that is, covered in graffiti on the Palestinian side, and it's just meant to separate Palestinians from the Jewish community. I mean, it was a very obvious system of segregation and apartheid that you don't have to be an expert to realize is in practice and in place there. And it was just so not talked about in the US. And coming back, I decided to do more research of like how is the US connected to this? And obviously the US sends $3.8 billion to the Israeli military every year, and that number has gone up since October 7th. This is something that, even if we don't see it directly affecting our neighbors here, it is something we are directly complicit in via our tax dollars. And now as a university student, my tuition dollars, as our university endowments are invested in corporations that are upholding these systems of oppression. And beyond that, I saw very clear parallels between the systems of apartheid in the West Bank to the militarization of the US-Mexico borderlands, right? Like there are checkpoints that operate almost identically to those in the West Bank throughout southern Arizona that, disproportionately harm Latino and indigenous people. And studying that more when I started college, I learned that the companies that provide the infrastructure for those checkpoints here in the US that are run by US Customs and Border Patrol come from Elbit Systems, which is an Israeli military infrastructure company. And the officers who patrol the border and brutalize migrants are directly trained by soldiers in the Israeli military. So when we talk about systems of injustice being connected and our liberation being interconnected, that's a very literal thing. There are material connections between these injustices we see around the world. So it's frustrating sometimes. It's overwhelming to think about all the different problems around the world and struggling to come to which one to focus on. Should I focus on migrant justice or should I focus on Palestine? But at the end of the day, I learned that it doesn't matter. Fighting for one is itself fighting for the other at the same time, because when you deconstruct one, you're also, indirectly deconstructing the other materially. And I mean, beyond my personal connections and experiences, to get back to what motivates me, I was raised Orthodox Christian, and that meant I was raised on, a certain religious/moral philosophy around justice. And, one verse always stuck with me from the prophet Isaiah: to break the rod of the oppressor and let the oppressed go free. It's not just that we, believe in doing good or do good to our neighbors, but actively we are called to fight against the systems of oppression that surround us. So, if I'm not doing that, then I'm disgracing my call that as a human being put on this planet. And I think that call transcends, religious identity. It's a call for all of us to stand for justice and build a lasting peace. And peace, of course, can only truly be built on a foundation of justice. I'll end it there.
Thank you, Lucas. Before I move into our last moderated question for our panelists, I just want to draw some through lines that I felt in all of your responses about the importance of righteous anger as a motivating feature in your advocacy, as well as your relationship to family members, friends, and communities as people who tied you in on issues. And also each of you kind of mentioned starting on one issue, right? And then that being a door opener for all of these other issues and advocacy opportunities that you've been involved in since. So thank you all for sharing. And now I want to hear a little bit from each of you about something that you learned about yourself through organizing for social justice on campuses. And also, if you want to share challenges that you faced that were an educator for you or a teacher for you about yourself or about campus organizing, that would be great as well. And we can start with Eunice again.
Okay. Yes, I learned a lot about those activities I had 50 years ago. I really learned a lot. If it wasn't for those activities, I may not have been the person I am today with the open mind that I have and the other concerns that have come to me and made part of my personality now. I learned how to influence people and organizations. I developed self-confidence in thoughts, actions, and speaking to groups, which I never had before. I learned to talk respectfully with the opposition. I learned about human responsibility to be concerned about justice, peace, poverty, homelessness, hunger, health insurance for all types of discriminations, free education. These are all, I think now, for me, human rights. I learned to look for truths and search for facts. I talk my speeches and things based on facts and justice. I learned to propagate truths. I learned to stand against falsehoods and have respect for all of humanity. And last but not least, I really learned a lot about how we should respect Mother Earth and do whatever we can to stop global warming and the destruction of our environment. That is a very important thing for this generation and the future children of now. That really concerns me a lot now, and I've learned to practice it at home daily and different aspects of it, and also the thing that is very important, and I see a lot of people, they always follow the styles, so they change their clothes every year, every other year to have the new styles. I decided that I should ignore styles absolutely and wear my clothes until they are worn out. so I don't need to give anything away. And any other things in the house, if we don't need any tools or anything that I don't use anymore, instead of throwing it away, I give it to some places that make good use of them. That's it. Thank you. And you go to the next.
So I will say that one thing that organizing really taught me is how to turn my feelings and my, I guess, experiences into action. And I'll say that's one thing I really think that I learned a lot through my time in the Advocacy Corps. I know one thing that we focused on a lot during my intensive was how to speak to people who maybe don't have the same views as you, or who you know, have really opposing viewpoints than you do. And I think in my time as an organizer before joining Advocacy Corps, a lot of who I was surrounding myself with were other people who also felt enraged by the same things that I was enraged with. So we were all pretty much in agreement that, oh, we're all mad about the same thing. We all agree with each other. This is great. But I think after I joined the advocacy corps and, I had to lobby, my super conservative senators who were like asking me questions and like throwing things at me and trying to like throw me off at every point they could. That was something that I think really advocacy corps helped me with, was like, how do I start those conversations with people who don't really agree to me? And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with some of the challenges that I experienced and like how I overcame them. And so I know one thing that we talked about was, maybe trying to find a common ground or something that you can relate on, or like connecting through maybe emotions or like a shared experience. I know sometimes we think that people who are on the opposite side of us, they might not have morals, or sometimes we look at them and we think that they're heartless. But I think that everyone, there's some type of emotion that you can invoke in everyone. And so finding that common thing and kind of building from that is really how I overcame, um, you know, interacting with people who have different viewpoints than me. I think I'm also really learning about how much emotion and like how many things I take on. I think one thing that a lot of people don't talk about with being an organizer is the burnout, because of how much is going on around us. And as organizers, sometimes we think that we have to take on every single problem and every single issue that we hear about. And that can be very tiring. You feel like you're, sometimes carrying the weight of the world with you, and you're like one person and you're like, well, how can I change the world? And so that was another thing. I had to be kinder with myself and say, you know, I am one person. While there is a lot that I can do, there's also a lot that, I need to ask for help with from other people. I cannot do everything by myself. And so that was like another big thing that I really had to like come to terms with. And I think also really just learning how to interact with people who maybe have different lived experiences than me. I'm always encountering people who have different backgrounds and different personal values. And so um, learning just, how to coexist with all these different types of people, and being a better listener and having more awareness. I think also, especially when you organize around issues that have to do with a community that maybe you yourself don't belong to, having to learn how to take a step back and let someone else take the reins, and let someone else really like lead that movement, and you just learn how to follow sometimes. So yeah.
I think trying to figure out lessons learned. I think it's lessons I'm still learning for me. I think a big one for me is talk less, listen more. I'm not sure I'm that good at it yet, but I'm still working on that. And I think one of the things, and I really resonate with what's been said so far, for me was learning to slow down my own thoughts a little bit and listen more and challenge what I thought I had so well figured out, and maybe figure out what the cracks in that are a little bit. And then also learn from people in struggle. The South African leadership that would come over to New York, where I was living at the time, would be, let's go out and hear jazz. And we're like, oh, we got work to do. And they're like, no, we got to go listen to jazz. We're in New York. And I think that idea that it's your whole life, that it's not a thing you do as a job. It's not a thing you do it's your practice in your life of how you're making change. And it isn't just over here. It isn't just supporting other people. It's also about, how do you want to change the community you're in? How do you want, what do you see as ways you can educate yourself about things that you don't know about? And how do you stay open? For me, one of the really important things in my 20s was there were older people who would listen. And that was unusual, at least in my generation. Maybe it's not anymore. I don't know, but that a lot of old people are like, well, you don't know anything, and so the idea was you were just going to hear the wisdom. But there were, I can remember, I can think of their names, although I won't say them all now, people who would actually listen and give me space to do things and make my own mistakes. And so that practice for me carried on through my life. I mean, that's what so excites me about FCNL and the Advocacy Corps, Friends Place, and the advocacy teams and the Quaker engagement work, that community learning, continuing to learn, because it's not a learning in the past. It's not in the past. It's something I'm working on still, and I'm sure I don't have it yet.
Lucas, if you want to bring us home on this question about your learnings and growth through campus organizing.
For sure. Thinking on this, and I'll second what Jim said, I'm still learning every single day. I could not even like offer you an explanation of the ins and outs of organizing because I learned something new every day from a past organizer, from one of my fellow organizers right now. Like there's always something new, and that's, one of the beautiful things about being a student, where, our job is to be ambitious enough to act, but also humble enough to keep growing. But as to what I've learned, I think two major things really stand out. Number one, I learned how much of a choice fighting for justice is. And I guess that's kind of nebulous, but what I mean is it's easy when I'm in a state of calm, when there's nothing big going on, to say, I support justice and I would do anything to fight for it. But when push comes to shove, that's when we really got to think, right? And push indeed came to shove over the past 10 months, and it still does. And that's a terrifying trial to endure. Because, there are moments I come to the realization where, like, I don't have to be doing this. I don't have to be stressing myself out. I don't have to be putting myself at risk. And I could stop at any moment, but I don't. And that's because I've had enough strength and enough courage and enough wisdom to not back down from this fight. But that strength and courage and wisdom doesn't come out of thin air. It comes from my fellow organizers, from my mentors, from my professors that have stood with us, from the broader community all across the DMV that has stood with us, and from everybody that I can lean on. Like if I was alone in this fight, then I think I would have stopped in October. But the fact that we have this community is what, strengthens me to keep going and allows me to know that even though, it's terrifying, I don't necessarily know what's going to happen next week, either in Gaza or here. But I know that no matter what, there's still going to be, somebody who has my back and I have somebody else's. And I think that makes the choice very easy. There's an interview from James Baldwin that I keep coming back to, and he says, and I'm paraphrasing, that every day we have to make the conscious decision to devote ourselves to creating a better world for all of us. And everyone around us is also us. Like we can be the cop that we're protesting against. We can be the oppressor. We could even be completely neutral at any given moment, which of course, neutrality is, supporting injustice, but I won't go on that tangent. But, he says every day we have to choose not to be. It's not a given that we're fighting for justice. We could always be, contributing to the problem. And that's the decision that, I and every other student organizer has to make every day. And it's a hard decision, but when we have a community built around a steadfast ethos of love, that makes it easy. I won't belabor that point any longer. The other thing organizing has taught me is patience. I very naively thought, like I was fully confident that we were going to get a ceasefire by January. And obviously that did not happen, and it's now July, and things are still abysmal as ever in Gaza. And I felt like a failure because of it. And I know my comrades have too. I'm often like lying awake at night asking like, oh, maybe if we did, an extra protest in November, or maybe if we did this differently, then, it would have pushed the Biden administration just a little bit further, and, things wouldn't be at least as bad as they are now. But, at the end of the day, the struggle is long. and that doesn't mean it's futile. And I think that's why it's so important to study history. At Georgetown University in, I think, 1986, 30 some odd students were arrested at the campus Shantytown protesting the school's investments in apartheid South Africa. And that was in April of that year. The school didn't agree to divest until September of that year. So there was a whole summer break in between the arrests and the actual commitment to divest. And I can only imagine how much of an eternity that felt like for those students. I mean, even just like the past few weeks have felt like an eternity for me. You know, we're still fighting the legal cases of the students who were arrested on May 8th at the DMV SJP encampment. And it feels like we're going nowhere, right? But in reality, like we're in such a small moment in time, and the struggle is so much larger than even just our divestment campaign. It's larger than us. It's been built on generations, and nothing's ever made right overnight or even in a month. Vietnam War didn't end in enough. Apartheid didn't end in a month. Pinochet didn't fall in a month. And we're still fighting for Black liberation in this country, but that doesn't mean that any of the work that has been done is futile. It's just a long process, and that's frustrating. But so long as we're pushing, we are pushing. We're pushing the needle. We're pushing the envelope, and we're pushing us ever closer, closer than we've ever been before to justice.
Thank you, Lucas. I feel so motivated and inspired from hearing your guys' inspirations and your relationships to organizing and the growth that you experienced. And I have so many more questions for each of you, but I want to open up opportunities for our audience members to pose questions as well. So what we're going to do now is take a very Quakerly minute of silent settling in, and we're going to contemplate any questions we might have for individual panelists or the panelists as a group. And for our folks online, we'll ask that you either type your questions into the chat, at which point Olivia will select one of those questions from the chat, or you can raise your hand in the online meeting room and Olivia will call on you to unmute and ask your question. For people in the room, we have Alicia who's going to help us out as a mic runner. We'll just ask that you raise your hand if you have a question that you want to ask, and that when you receive the mic, you'll stand so that people online can see you, and then we'll adjust our camera settings so that the camera will kind of track around to people who are speaking. And if it lags for a second, don't worry, it will get caught up to whoever is speaking. So let's just take about a minute now and settle into some silence together before we go to questions. Thank you so much. We'll start by opening the floor to people in the room. Please raise your hand if you have a question for any of the panelists or for the panel on the whole. Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Humaira. Thank you so much for your sage and inspiring presentations tonight. I have a question about how you process mistakes. And as organizers, obviously it's, things do go sideways sometimes. And specifically, I think about the student protests and the case of UNC Chapel Hill, where students lowered the American flag and put up the Palestinian flag. And while for many of us that was a cheering moment, it was obviously very controversial, and I think got a lot of backlash. And I would argue it was a mistake. So as an organizer, how do you walk back from something like that, and how do you try to ensure that you're sort of treading a very careful line?
And I'll open it to any of our panelists who feel led to lead off, and Lucas, you as well, feel free to unmute yourself and lead off if you want to respond.
Yes, there are things that we do, and we later regret, why did I do it this way and not that way? But that is a process that is hard to really avoid. I have some experiences that, for example, the peace rally that we had was successful without all the problems that were faced on the way. And if we have time, I'll give those examples of how we solved them, and we had to do it quickly. But the other thing is that, I think in movements, there should be a plan, a strategy, and a flexible ways of accomplishing that strategy. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck. And the mistake that we made in the time of the war was everything went well. At the end, some people suddenly decided to not leave the mall where we were singing peace songs, and the National Guard announced that you have to leave or else you'll be arrested. And some people decided to get arrested. And since I was the one who really started this march, I felt bad if I don't get arrested. So I stayed there also. Well, what happened is the others were released after that night, and they gave each one some $25 fee or something, and they left. But my case did not. I found that now they accused me of being a leader, the king, as the police use this word. When he was giving me to the other police to take me to a prison, they all were in local jail temporarily for the night, but they took me to the prison, and said, "Be careful with him. He's the king." And so then came a couple of days later came the I don't know the word for it. That we went before a judge who would let me be released or not. And they said that there's 20 the things that they had met me: attempted arson, burning of the American flag and throwing it into the armory, and instigating the disorder on the campus, and all these things. And some of these had up to 20 years imprisonment. The maximum punishment was that much. And so they said no, unless you have to. And we had someone from the university, my professor, came to say that you can release him on recognition. I assure you that he will come to court when it is necessary. But they didn't accept it. So we had to find it to pay bail. We had to get money. I had to pay $2,000 for my bail out, and money was put together, and I paid that and came out. But what happened is, on all the others, I had to worry about their going to court and someday and all of that. So what happened is everyone started paying attention to that, and really the movement stopped. The movement completely stopped. If you have a movement and you are going to decide to have some to go to jail, plan it in advance. Who can go to jail and who should not go to the jail for the continuity of the movement, and have it that way so that it doesn't use all the energies that you had. And that was a big mistake that happened that night. So this is something really think about that and plan even the details of what you want to do. And if they come to bother us, if the other side comes to be aggressive, like in the demonstrations for the Palestine thing and in the universities happened, what do you do? Should you yell back? Should you react to them? They come to push you around or something. What should you do? No, you have to plan in advance all of this, because each one of those acts may have a consequence. They come intentionally to disturb you, to get angry, do something that then they can say, oh, they pushed me, punched me or something. So, plan everything in advance as much as you can. Don't be hopeless if things don't go the way you said, as he mentioned also. Don't be hopeless. Persevere, continue, and have patience, and keep on going.
Also happy to jump in a bit to answer that. Thank you so much, Eunice, for that extremely thoughtful and insightful response. But I think asking about mistakes is very valid. I felt a lot of pressure to be perfect as an organizer, especially with how much attention pro-Palestine student organizers have been getting, especially over the past few months. It is extremely daunting of a task, and I've made mistakes. Every organizer I know has made mistakes. I don't know too much specifically about the incident at UNC Chapel Hill, so I don't want to speak to that. But I think the most important thing is, as Eunice said, perseverance, and also to not beat yourself up over mistakes, to be adaptable. Organizing is inherently risky work, especially as students. We don't have all the answers. We're ambitious, we're taking risks, and inherently that means as humans we're going to be making mistakes, and sometimes we're going to be making really big mistakes. But when those mistakes happen, especially if they have consequences for ourselves, for our peers, for the movement, for our community, it is our responsibility to clean up after ourselves, to make sure that we are rectifying any harm that we may cause, and also adapting to whatever challenges arise. Challenges arise even without us making mistakes. So adaptability is just a necessary trait inherent to organizing. But I really don't think there's anything too special about responding to mistakes. They're going to happen, and it's our responsibility to take what we have and to build with it and around it and alongside it.
Thank you. So I want to check in with Olivia and see if we have a question online.
We do. Peter has a question / comment for Lucas. Peter, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much. Lucas, I was really impressed with some of the things you said. Really liked a lot of it. And I wanted to ask you if you are aware of the movement action plan that was written years ago by Bill Moyers. not the Bill Moyers that was the journalist, but another guy, an activist. Are you aware of that? Okay,
No, I'm
well,
not.
the material that you or the concept that you are talking about in terms of patience and in terms of learning that movements have a rhythm and a life was wonderfully documented by this guy. So I suggest you take a look at that. It will probably help to inform your activist life for the rest of your life. If you take a look at that, it's called the Movement Action Plan. The guy's name is Bill Moyer, Moyer. He wrote a book called Doing Democracy is the right name of it. So I really encourage you to look at that because he talks about there are 8 stages of a movement. And it's very important when you're involved in a movement to be able to recognize what stage you're in and how the life of a movement will help you decide what's a strategic thing to do and what's not. So just wanted to bring that out because I thought of it very strongly. Yeah, somebody put it into the text, into the chat there. That's very helpful. Thank you. So just a suggestion from a now a very old activist.
Thank you so much, sir. I'll definitely look into that. I wrote it down.
I'm not Sir, I'm Peter.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Okay, I want to open up for another question in the room. Do we have any questions in the room? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Kaya. I am currently not a student, but I plan on enrolling soon, and I'm kind of nervous about how time consuming it's going to be doing classes and juggling schoolwork with activism. I'm wondering if there's any good advice that you might have with organizing those different parts of your life, even though they might mesh sometimes.
Avella, I wonder if you can lead off in a response to this question.
So I don't know what you're planning on studying when you enroll in school, but I know one thing that I did. So I was a political science and peace and conflict studies major, so very much yeah. So a lot of my organizing also went hand in hand with a lot of the things that I was studying in school. So I was able to lean on a lot of my professors as resources. So that was a really good thing for me, relationships with them. And then also getting involved with like other student groups on campus. There, a lot of the times, we're all students. We're very mindful that everyone has classes and different schedules that we have to adhere to. And so just like getting involved with those groups, like, maybe in between classes, if they have events or things like that. I will say it's not always the most, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not always the most ideal. You will have some late nights. You might pull an all-nighter in the library one night. You come back from like a protest or something one day and you might have like a big test the next day and you're like, oh shoot, I still have to go study. There will be some of those days. So I'm not saying that, you can completely avoid those. But yeah, I really would just say just try to lean on your peers, your professors. Hopefully they're, there to help you. And so, yeah.
Olivia, looks like we might have another question online.
Thank you. We have 2 comments online that I'll read and 1 question. The first comment is from Charlie. Charlie says, I am from Cascabel, Arizona, a Vietnam veteran who did not discover I was a Quaker until after I returned. I have served SCYM as representative to FCNL in the early 1990s. I still suffer from my participation in that war. I welcome the young people who are learning to stand up for the meaning of FCNL, Hoa Bin, war is not healthy for children and other all living beings. The question I want to read is from Margaret, who asks, I live in a small rural community in California, and there are not the resources that many of the panelists speak to. Are there resources online? Where would you recommend that students here look for basic understanding of nonviolent action? So any recommendations you all have for resources that students can look to for nonviolent action?
I wonder if any panelists want to lead off sharing any resources or inspiration for nonviolent action that people might access.
Just say, fortunately, today there's internet. Really, if you Google something, you'll find something invariably. There's a lot of information, which in my times, there was none of that available to search or anything. We had to go to the library, look for a book for it. And so, yeah, there's opportunities that are like that, and you can find the answers.
Excellent.
Can also jump in.
Yeah.
Just quickly offer Googling Kwame Ture. He used to go by Stokely Carmichael. He was the chairman of SNCC, or the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and he went to Howard University, so right here in DC. I learned so much from him every day as a student organizer. He offered a really well thought out and extremely insightful ethos and praxis for organizing. And I think even if you're not a student yet, or if you intend on going to university and you want to become an organizer, or even if you're just an observer of the movement, he's an incredible ancestral mentor.
Great. Thank you, Lucas. Do panelists have any other resources they may want to share?
I will also say that I think the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, they also have a little like series, or I don't know what to call it, the Know Your Rights. And so on a lot of their websites, on the national website or in their state affiliates, they will have like these pamphlets about like step-by-steps of like how to organize on a college campus, or like how to reach people across state lines or things like that. So that was a really great resource for me. And yeah, I think there's also there might be some stuff on the FCNL website too. We're talking about peaceful protests. Yeah.
Great. And we have time for one more question in the room, I think. Oh, maybe we can get, okay. We'll do two.
Hi, my name is Alex. I'm currently a second year at UC Santa Cruz. And first and foremost, sorry, I had two questions, but I just want to summarize the first one, I guess, more as a comment, because the UC system actually did divest from apartheid. I think $36 billion. And I guess as a UC student now organizing for divestment from Israel, I think it's very interesting to draw on the parallels from, I don't know, that administration and this administration, and see, I don't know, what tactics did work and didn't. But yeah, thank you for sharing about that. But the question I did have was, I think particularly towards Lucas, and it's about how I think a theme that I noticed on my campus and several other campuses' actions is that it's oftentimes the most vulnerable students putting themselves on the front lines for this kind of work. And obviously, the closer you are to the problem, the more invested you are in it. But I think I've also been very inspired by my peers who have little to no connection, aside from just recognizing that what is happening right now is horrific and must be stopped. But aside from that, have no personal connection to to Palestinian I mean, we all do in a sense, but I think you know what I mean. Um, and so I guess what's your advice on mobilizing those students and getting those students kind of from the periphery who are who likely recognize that, like I said, what is going on is horrific, but don't necessarily have a stake in the matter, but also can be some of the most useful tools in the sense of, it is much more catastrophic, I guess, if an undocumented student gets arrested versus a student who has citizenship. And so using them as allies, I guess. That was kind of all over the place. So draw from that what you can. But
No, I absolutely hear you, and I echo those same frustrations. And I, to be completely honest with you, don't have a, fully fleshed out answer to that question because that's an issue that I'm still struggling with here as a student organizer at Georgetown and in the DMV. But the advice that I was given by another organizer, a mentor who, since graduated but is still involved in pro-Palestine organizing, is to meet people where they're at. I, personally, I get really frustrated with people. I'm like, well, you're seeing exactly what I'm seeing. Why are you not, putting yourself out there? Why are you not doing everything that you can to help? But, I don't know the reason why somebody might not be getting involved. And I'm not going to know that until I sit down and have a conversation with them, if they're even open to having a conversation. And I'm not going to get an answer if I'm, belligerent about, with my frustrations about people not being involved. I really have learned that it's important to just meet people where they are, understand what resources they have access to, what knowledge they have access to, where they still are learning, where they still want to learn, where they still want to grow, and offer what I can offer to them. You can't make anybody do anything, and you're not running a movement if you're forcing anybody to do anything. You're running a dictatorship. But you can at least give people the resources that they need to know that they can take action. They can take informed action. They can, do so knowing that they have a community behind them to support them, that they're not alone if they take a step forward, that, whatever issue somebody's facing, chances are there's somebody else on campus involved in organizing that's, faced the same issue or something similar. Community building is number one. You can't bring people into the movement unless you get to know them first, is one of the most important things I've learned. So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer because again, like I echo those same frustrations, but I mean that's what's been working for me, and I wish you, full solidarity and all the best in your divestment campaign on the other side of the country.
My name is Basil. I want to follow up on the first question about mistakes because the panelists gave responses that seemed to me were descriptions of strategic mistakes. But there are other mistakes which maybe are not really under the complete control of organizers when there are elements within an activity that go off script, that don't uphold the principle that the movement is striving for, and yet it's appears that seems to speak for the movement when it doesn't. It's so how do you deal with those kinds of mistakes? Do you issue an apology? Do you walk it back? Do you separate yourself from it? What do you do?
I wonder if any panelists want to lead off on this one. Yeah.
My experience is from a long time ago, but then also being involved in activist organizing more recently. I think the two things I would say is one, you have to have clear decision-making structures, because what you define as let's say what I define as a mistake, somebody else might not define as a mistake. And so for your community, being clear about what your decision-making structures are so that you can say, this is a mistake. And then you have to have separately. And I've learned a lot of this actually. I can remember talking when I was at FCNL to DACA organizers in, I'm going to call them out, Larissa, Dallas, Texas, who had a great media strategy separate from the decision-making strategy. Because then the decision becomes, okay, we made a mistake. And then separately, are we going to say something about that to the media at the same time? And I think that's up. I'm not saying that's easy or that I keep making mistakes. So I'm not going to sit on a pedestal, but I think those are the two things I'd focus on.
So we have just a few minutes left, and I want to first say that everyone who registered to attend this event is going to receive a follow-up email, kind of overviewing the event, sharing the recording, and then sharing out some links about upcoming FCNL stuff, of course, but also about things our panelists are interested in connecting the audience with. And I want to invite panelists to just maybe each take 30 seconds to a minute and share a little bit about what they're working on right now or what they're most concerned with in the activism and advocacy space, and how people might go about getting involved in supporting that work in some way.
Well, I'm 80 years old, so I'm not planning to start anything, or I participate in demonstrations still. Myself and my children and grandchildren, they all come to demonstrations, and whatever they are, if we hear about it, we try to go. Other than that, I don't have any other plans at this time, other than just contemplate and hope for the best. Right now, the news of Palestine is terrible, and I suffer every day listening to it, but I have to listen to it. So that's what I do.
I think like so many other people, like this year's advocacy core, I'm super hyper focused on what's going on right now in Palestine. But I'm also very involved in the migrant movement, especially in North Carolina. And so I think if that's something that maybe you're interested into like looking more into or supporting a little bit more about, some resources that I found really helpful were, I'm trying to remember their website name, the New Arrivals Institute in Greensboro, North Carolina. They do a lot with like refugees and things like that. And they also have a lot of like stats and things that you can look up. Also, Faith Action International House in North Carolina. They do a lot of work with the undocumented community. And they also have done a lot of lobbying around community ID programs in North Carolina. And there were specific laws like targeting their community ID programs. And just for context, I know I'm saying community IDs and some people might not know what that is. So for undocumented immigrants, a lot of the times, especially in North Carolina, they can't get state or federal issued IDs. And so what a lot of organizations will do is they'll create their own personalized community ID so that people can do things like get medication from a pharmacy, register their kids for school, or like if they are maybe walking on the street or something and get stopped by a police officer and they ask for identification, they can have something to show them. And so in North Carolina, our state legislature tried to completely annihilate community ID programs. And so Faith Action is one of the organizations that is working to keep those active. So yeah.
I'm working as a journalist, so I have the privilege of being able to actually write about people making change around the United States. So that's the thing I'd say there. The second thing I would say is that, like everybody in this room, it sounds like I'm watching the horror in Gaza. And as someone who's been in this country for a long time, though, I'm also watching how the debate in this country has changed. It's not enough. It's got to stop. But at the same time, there's a debate about Palestine that didn't exist 3 years ago in this country. And that is because it started with the students. What the Harvard study says, there's a lot of other people out there who are doing serious organizing on this issue. And that to me is exciting. How to get involved? I would say FCNL. Get involved with the advocacy teams, get involved with the advocacy core, get involved with the governance of the organization if you're a Quaker, get involved in some of these Zoom things, and then provide financial support if you're in a position to do that. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. And Lucas, if you want to bring us home.
For sure. Number one, donate if you have the means to families in Gaza. If your For You page on Instagram looks anything like mine, you are flooded with videos of people just pleading that you check the link in their bio and open their GoFundMe and donate. So I think above all, like, Gaza is top priority right now, and doing whatever you can to materially support families in need and people in need, like, that's paramount. In terms of the local community here, you may have heard that 5 arrested students from George Washington University have hearings tomorrow, in which George Washington University's administration has requested the prosecution to implement 6-month-long stay-away orders from Foggy Bottom against all of those students. So students enrolled at George Washington University risk not being able to go back to their own campus for 6 months. There's currently an email campaign. If you go to @DMVSJP on Instagram, there are a few posts about it. The link is bit.ly/dropthestayaways, and I can drop that in the chat for those online, where you can just send a pre-written email to George Washington's administration, calling for them to, stop using the courts to punish their students, and to, stop punishing pro-Palestine activism altogether. And aside from that, just keep an eye out for continued actions in the community. This is an ongoing movement. We rely heavily on community support. When the encampment was up, when we were locked inside the courtyard by George Washington University's barricades, we relied on DC community members to bring us food. Thank you for not letting us starve in there. But yeah, we really do rely on you guys, and we are one community. So just keep your eyes out, especially as the semester starts back up again.
I wonder if we could just give it up for all our panelists one more time. Thank you so much for being here tonight with us and sharing your experience. You guys were incredible, really motivating and inspiring for me personally. I'm sure for many others on the call and in the room. As I said earlier, we're going to be following up with some links to connect you guys with some of these issues from our panelists, and also for some FCNL stuff coming up. Just super quickly, I'll run through a couple of things. Annual meeting 2024 registration is open, and the theme is advocacy that never gives up, persistence, perseverance. This was a theme shared by all of our panelists tonight. So go online. We'll be sharing out that link in the follow-up email. Our diaspora gathering, our second annual diaspora gathering. There's going to be a 3-day in-person retreat that's going to include community building, skills training, panel conversations for diaspora identifying organizers aiming to work on foreign policy advocacy. So we'll share out the link on how you can apply and become a candidate for that opportunity. And also, if you are a reader, we are doing an FCNL book club on an anthology book called Light in Gaza, published by our friends over at American Friends Service Committee and Haymarket Books. That is all about Palestinian authors, poets, artists sharing their vision for a different future for Gaza, for a peaceful and just future for Gaza. So if you're interested, that book is freely available as a download at Haymarket Books, and we'll share out the link for that. And on August 29th, we'll be meeting virtually to kind of discuss our takeaways from that reading. And last but not least, if you enjoyed this event, if you were excited about the work being done by any of the young advocates or any of the advocates at all in the room tonight, please support Friends Place or FCNL with a donation if you are able, so that we can continue doing this work and making these opportunities available. And I'll close with that. Thank you, everybody.